What is culture? We talk a lot about culture, white culture, black culture, Latino culture, American culture. What is culture? I think we oversimplify it. We think that culture is music and fashion and, entertainment and sports and all those kind of fun things, relatively frivolous, but not frivolous. They're fun, right? That's not all culture is. Culture is values. What do your people value? What are their ethics? What is the framework that you operate in? The way that you say, okay, these are the things we champion. These are the things that we value. And if you want to be in our culture and be in good stead in our culture and in good standing, you will practice these values that we do to make you a good member of our culture. Okay? Hard work, good work ethic, be honest, be on time, keep your promises, right? That's an ethical framework. It's part of a culture. What else is culture? Attitudes. What are your attitudes about? What is the cultural attitude that Asians have about education? They value education. It is a cornerstone of the Asian culture. Education as a necessity for attaining success. They get it. They accept it, period. No need to debate it. No need to argue it. It's just the way it is. It happens to work. It's proven. So it's also these attitudes that we have about things, attitudes about relationships, about family. A culture is also its strengths and its accomplishments and the pride and the ownership that it takes of a number of other kinds of features as well. And there are cultures that champion innovation. Mm-hmm. And so they have a lot of innovation. They have a lot of business. There are cultures that champion commerce. All of these different spheres of our human activity constitute a culture. It's all culture. It's not just music and fashion and haircuts no. It's all of this stuff, all of these activities that happen within the community are part of its culture. So if you just take pride in the fun things and ignore all these other things in your culture, then you're being blind. You have misidentified the definition. You've misunderstood the definition of it. So that when I hear Black people say, white people have no culture, I even hear, what am I hearing lately? I'm hearing Africans saying that African Americans or Black Americans have no culture. White people have a culture. Who's the big fat man in the red suit that comes down the chimney? That's a cultural tradition, that big, jolly, fat man. That story may have its earliest roots somewhere other than Europe, but pretty much that tradition grew out of Europe and Europeans. Industrialization, mechanization, automation is a cultural feature. Building systems that facilitate those kinds of industries. Systems building, a systems mentality, things that are built that work and connections and machines. Building practical machines like at the level of mechanics, like an engine, but also machines like processes, like logistics, like global logistical networks. That's a machine too. That is a cultural feature. This kind of framework of how to do business is a feature. All cultures have their own kind of business style. Some cultures have so much corruption in their business culture that it is just a given that you are going to need to bribe. It's just a given. And you should go into I have a friend who worked for a large global brand, and he would just say that when he went to certain countries, he always had to bring cash because he knew he was going to be bribed. He was going to have to pay a bribe. And he knew that he was going to be offered any number of inducements to close a deal that would run against the policies of his country. Certain favors that could be extended by certain attractive young women. He knew this. He expected that this was part of the culture that he was stepping into. He did not participate in either of those things, but that was the business culture there. We frown upon that. It's not to say there's no bribery here. It's not to say there aren't any favors there. There are a lot of military, there's some military corruption stuff in the Navy that I've seen that had make the best corrupt person out of one of these other countries blush. Really rampant, bad stuff, okay? But generally speaking, American business culture looks down on corruption. Generally speaking, although it exists, we work against it, and we have established a whole set of laws that address it, and we enforce those laws. Not completely, but yeah, generally. There are surveys that are done of business, and the United States generally comes out favorably when analyzed for its amount of corruption in its business practices and its business culture. All of these things represent culture. So when I hear people saying these people don't have culture or these people don't have culture, I'm like, do you even know what the definition of culture is? And you don't. And yet you continue with this kind of proud ignorance of spouting this opinion that these people don't have culture. The idea that Black Americans don't have culture. You may not like it or certain elements of it, but it is absolutely a culture. Just like Nigerians have culture, just like Argentinians have culture, just like Germans and Brits and Slovenians, and we all have culture. Asians, we often also do a very injustice to Asians. We think that Asians are a monolith. My God. We also think African culture is a monolith. Well, they're all black, right? All from Africa, right? So they got a culture. No. Africa is one of the most diverse countries on the planet. I think there are over 800 languages that are spoken in Africa. For context, I think about 300 are spoken in the United States. Do you think among all, and there are 1,000 tribes, more than that probably. We don't have that many different kinds of tribes in the United States. It's extremely diverse. And one thing said about one group of Africans is absolutely not relevant to another group. They all have their own unique kinds of practices. There are a lot of shared practices as well, but to address them as a monolith is ignorant. It's one of the reasons that I think it's really this idea that one of the tropes that I've heard all of my life is that Black people just need to get together. Black people have never all been together because they're too different. There are too many different tribes and too many different cultures. There is no one Black culture. And organizing based on skin color versus affinity versus nation versus other shared interests, generally not such a good rubric, in my opinion. So humbly. And I got into this little rabbit hole because I think we do a bad a disservice to Asians when we talk about Asian culture. I promise you that the people from the Philippines and the people from Japan are not the same. There is, and within Asian culture, there's a lot of racism in Asian culture. Listen to Bobby Lee talk about Asian culture. He has a funny take on it. He says his father kind of used to do a listing, a rank order of Asian cultures. I think Filipinos were generally are considered the blacks of Asia. Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, Thais, they're all very, very unique. So you just can't say something about Asian culture. There are some very broad brush stroke kinds of, similarities, but these are very distinct cultures, just like in Africa. Okay? So don't just lump them all together. And know what you're talking about when you talk about culture. Because when you misdefine it and then go on to insult people based on your ignorance, you lose credibility and you antagonize, and what good comes out of that? Well, hopefully some good comes out of it, that you have a light bulb that goes on and goes, oh, I thought culture was limited to this. It's actually much bigger. And so I do need to give some props to some of the other people who I said had no culture, because if I look at the scoreboard across all of these different spheres of their culture, got to give them their props. They've put some points on the board. Okay, we have put some points on the board in some of these other spheres, but they've put some points on the board in those spheres. And being respectful of the different cultures. This culture better than that culture. They're different. They're different. Comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison is the thief of joy. And sometimes we just need to accept that we all have beautiful, rich, strong, and vibrant cultures in certain respects. And then we have certain other areas of our culture that are just, let's put that on the needs to be improved list. I talk so frequently about Black culture. Let me turn myself to white culture. I'm easily as critical about white culture as I'm about Black culture. White culture just doesn't happen to be in as much distress. All right. I mentioned in an earlier video that, one of my general practices as a business person when I'm handling a large global brand launch, for example, that I'm managing, I will climb a tower every morning like a forest ranger looking over his territory, and I will scan the horizon. I'm looking for, I like to see that Frisbee party, that ultimate Frisbee game going on in the park down there. And I like seeing wins. I like seeing good things happening, and I like to share those wins among the team. But I have a very, very critical eye for wisps of smoke. Where are the fires? And I want to get to the fire, but while it's still just kind of a smoke at the smoke stage versus when it's ablaze and it's spreading and threatening all the rest of the land. So I address Black issues because I see more fires in the Black community, and because I love Black community. And part of my love is expressed with my being honest. There are a lot of people who think they're helping the Black community and are doing some terribly damaging things in the name of helping them. And there aren't enough people, white people, who actually have enough familiarity based on lived experience with the Black community. Most white people's conception of the Black community and Black culture is through what we see on screens. And that's about it for most white people. They see the music, they see the films, they see the crime, they see the news. And that's about it. Because unless you live in a city, a major metropolitan city, in the South or a few that are sprinkled across the North, where there are large black populations, most white people just don't encounter black people. So there's this kind of at a distance, kind of abstracted understanding of what black people are and how the mechanics of their culture work. So, but let me talk about, white culture some and where it's, what things need to be shored up there. I'm very, very concerned about this kind of materialistic bent that we have. I think white culture is materialism, and we see it reflected in black culture. It's one of the things that makes us particularly uncomfortable, one of the things that makes white people particularly uncomfortable between these kinds of ostentatious displays of kind of vain displays of materialism that white people perceive in black culture, particularly among, rappers and that kind of, entertainment figures. It's nothing but a mirror. That's why it hurts so much, because it shows us how ugly materialism, our own materialism, is. It's a bit exaggerated, all right? Black people haven't been doing this white culture thing long enough to really have it dialed in and highly refined like white people who've been doing it a long time. So it can be a little bit gauche. But it serves its purpose, because what it does is it's like a funhouse mirror. Remember, you go to the carnival and you go into the funhouse and it'd have these mirrors that make you look really skinny and tall or make you look really fat and short. It distorts your image. That's what black culture is for white culture in several respects. It is a funhouse mirror on white culture, and it does exaggerate some things like materialism. But boy, is it really grotesque. It shows us the grotesqueness of materialism gone wild. And it's nothing, black people didn't learn this by themselves. They learned it by observing white people. These brands, the things that we value, the things that are the signifiers of success, the totems of capitalistic success, are the things that they are emulating and the way that we mount them as trophies on our walls. So I think our materialism is something that I'm very concerned about with white culture. I think it's corrosive, anti-spiritual. It is not good for the human to place so much value in the things of the world while ignoring their inner world, which is, I think, what happens. The net effect of this is that we become so involved in the stuff of the world that we kind of abandon the universe inside of us, which is the biggest work that we have to do is inside of us. Most of us come into this world believing that our biggest task is to conquer the world. Our biggest task is to come to terms with our own individual humanity and to try to learn some self-mastery. How are you going to change the world if you can't change yourself? Culture. What is it? We all have it. Let's be real about it. Let's look at it with clear eyes and understand that we all have cultures that are mixtures of positive and negative traits and things that we need to improve on and things that are wonderful and beautiful and inspiring. Give respect to other cultures, okay? Give them props. Show them, hand over the flowers every once in a while. And say, I know y'all do some fucked up shit over here, but I gotta admit, scoreboard, y'all got this going on. That goes for everybody. Let's give credit to everybody where it's due. Culture. Peace.